This month I've been teaching a class called Church History, but it's really on the first half of Great Controversy. And so I couldn't finish everything, and I thought I would speak one more time. Hope most of the students are here, and the rest of you can get a little glimpse of what we've been studying. I've entitled this An Incredible Lesson. I don't think too many people are paying attention, though, to this lesson. And that's one of the reasons I want to talk about it tonight, because God allowed this to happen as a warning for the last days. It's supposed to be an incredible lesson for the last days. In Revelation chapter 11, verse 3, we have a very interesting text. And I will give power unto my two witnesses. And if you read the whole chapter, you will see clearly that the two witnesses are the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Now, it's important to recognize that they were not stopped, but they were having a hard time. And so the Bible was only able to present truth in a very difficult way for 1,260 years, which started in 538 and ended in 1798. But that's just background to really the focus of this chapter. In verses 7 and 8, it says, And when they shall have finished their testimony, the beast that ascendeth out of the bottomless pit shall make war against them. And as you check out, what is this beast that arose out of the bottomless pit? It is Satan, but he always works through another power. And the power that Satan was going to work through here was France. And shall overcome them. And the them, of course, is talking about the Bible. So France would do something that would be the worst possible treatment of the Bible that had happened, and kill them. And their dead bodies shall lie in the street of the great city, which spiritually is called Sodom and Egypt, where also our Lord was crucified. So France would combine the two worst characteristics that the Bible presents. Pharaoh of Egypt, who was totally atheistic, and he said, well, who's God that I need to listen to him? And then we see that it combined that with Sodom, where sexual sin was one of the most predominant factors of Sodom. And, you know, I was very saddened years ago when I read in a book by an Adventist author, and he was a teacher at Andrews, and he didn't use the word sodomy, but he approved of sodomy. And so if you want to know what that is, you can look it up and see what it is. And so here we find a very serious problem, and as a result of having both of those problems, they would kill the Bible in their country. Now, of course, you can't 100% kill the Bible, because God still has a few. But it was so close to that, the Bible calls it, that he killed the Bible in that country. So let's look at a little bit of some of the history. of what happened because it was fulfilled exactly like the Bible said. Mortals, this is a speech being given to their Congress. Mortals, cease to tremble before the powerless thunders of a God whom your fears have created. Henceforth, acknowledge no divinity but reason. I offer you its noblest and purest image, the goddess, after being embraced by the president, was mounted on a magnificent car and conducted amidst an immense crowd to the Cathedral of Notre Dame to take the place of the deity. Then she was elevated on the high altar and received the adoration of all present. It's recorded by Allison, Volume 1, Chapter 10. And another writer, Scott, indicated who it was. It was a dancing girl of the opera, which also was a prostitute. And so this now became the god of France. Also, from the Journal of Paris, 1793, we learn, on one occasion, the popular society of the museum entered the hall of the municipality exclaiming, "Viva l'Eurovision!" My pronunciation of this is probably not correct. And carrying on the top of a pole the half-burned remains of the Old and New Testaments, which expiated in a great fire. Said the president, all the fooleries which they have made the human race commit. In other words, they were getting rid of all the craziness that the Bible brought to our world. In the book Great Controversy, page 283, it says, when the restraints of God's law were cast aside, it was found that the laws of man were inadequate to hold in check the powerful tides of human passion, and the nation swept on to revolt and anarchy. The war against the Bible inaugurated an era which stands in the world's history as the Reign of Terror. Now, I'm sure everybody has, well, maybe it's not presented in all countries, but if you study American history at all, I did hear about the Reign of Terror in that. Peace and happiness were banished from the homes and hearts of men. No one was secure. He who triumphed today was suspected, condemned tomorrow. Violence and lust held undisputed sway. Now we're going to read a little description of some of what happened, but there's no way to picture what really happened. Now, we might ask the question, why would this happen in France? Well, when the Reformation started, France was one of those countries that seemed to welcome the Reformation, and for a time, it looked like perhaps the whole country would decide in favor of the Reformation. The king was in favor, his wife was in favor, they had some powerful speakers, and it looked like things were really going to succeed there. But somebody, we don't know exactly who, it could have been a reformer, or it could have been someone that wanted to create problems for the reformers. And they tacked a sign on the king's door that scared him to death. And so he turned against the Reformation, and they had what was called the St. Bartholomew's Massacre, which took place in Paris, and it extended throughout the whole country to a large extent. And they all but stamped out every Huguenot and every Albigense. There were a few, I'm sure, that were left. And thousands of them evacuated the country because they saw if they stayed in the country, they would likely die. And so they essentially purged their country. Well, they got away with it for a while. But when it came to what we just read about, payday came for that deed. You can't get away with those kind of things. You know, one man stood up and said in front of everybody, God, if you don't do something about what we're saying, who's going to believe in you anymore? And God didn't seem to do anything for a long time, close to 300 years. But the time came for that action to have the result. It wasn't, some arbitrary decision on God's part that, well, I'm going to punish you for what you did, but they got the natural consequence of what they did. Violence and lust held undisputed sway. King, clergy, and nobles were compelled to submit to the atrocities of an excited and maddened people. Their thirst for vengeance was only stimulated by the execution of the king. And those who had decreed his death soon followed him to the scaffold. A general slaughter of all suspected of hostility to the revolution was determined. The prisons were crowded, at one time containing more than 200,000 captives. The cities of the kingdom were filled with scenes of horror. One party of revolutionists was against another party, and France became a vast field for contending masses, swayed by the fury of their passions. In Paris, one tumult succeeded another, and the citizens were divided into a medley of factions that seemed intent on nothing but mutual extermination. And to add to the general misery, the nation became involved in a prolonged and devastating war with the great powers of Europe. The country was nearly bankrupt. The armies were clamoring for arrears of pay. The Parisians were starving. The provinces were laid waste by brigands. And civilization was almost extinguished in anarchy and license. Now, there's a very important reason why we need to keep this piece of history in our mind, and why we need to make known this piece of history. The reason is it is going to happen again, but this time not just in France, but in every country of this world. In great controversy again, a day of retribution at last had come. It was not now the disciples of Jesus that were thrust into dungeons and dragged to the stake. Long ago, these had perished or been driven into exile. Unsparing Rome now felt the deadly power of those whom she had trained to delight in deeds of blood. And so payday came to Rome, and her priests and her leaders suffered the same thing they had inspired to be done to the Huguenots and to the Albigenses. The example of persecution which the clergy of France had exhibited for so many ages was now retorted upon them with signal vigor. The scaffolds ran red with the blood of the priests. The galleys and the prisons, once crowded with Huguenots, were now filled with their persecutors. Chained to the bench and toiling at the oar, the Roman Catholic clergy experienced all those woes which their church had so freely inflicted on the gentle heretics. They had done nothing to the priests except preach what the Bible said. And now it is coming back with a vengeance. Why do I say it's coming again? Well, here's what Revelation 13, verses 9 and 10 says. If any man have an ear. Now this is an interesting statement because we have two ears. And, you know, some people try to do two things at once. I've seen students sit in class and they're looking at their computer and they're supposedly listening to me with the other ear. I don't know how much they hear, but maybe they have one ear tuned to that. And so the Bible says, even if you have only one ear, if any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. So the persecutor will become the persecuted. Those that want to lead others into captivity, and it is a pledge that it's going to happen again in the last days, but their payday will come for that. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword must be killed with the sword. This is a law of the Bible. It's the law of God. You treat people the wrong way, and you will get treated the same way by somebody else. Then came those days when the most barbarous of all codes was administered by the most barbarous of all tribunals, when no man could greet his neighbors or say his prayers without danger of committing a capital crime. See, they couldn't pray, even in private, they couldn't pray without being killed. When spies lurked in every corner, when the guillotine was long and hard at work every morning, when the jails were filled as close as the holds of a slave ship, when the gutters ran foaming with blood into the Seine. So many people were killed, there was just a river of blood flowing from the slaughter machines. Now, whenever we talk about these things, we need to assure you, don't worry about that now. You need to know about it, but you don't have the faith to pass those kind of things. But you need to believe that God enabled people to do it, and He can do the same for you. While the daily wagon loads of victims were carried to their doom through the streets of Paris, the proconsuls, whom the sovereign committee had sent forth to the departments, reveled in an extravagance of cruelty unknown even in the capital. The knife of the deadly machine rose and fell too slow for their work of slaughter. Long rows of captives were mowed down with grape shot. Holes were made in the bottom of crowded barges. Lyons was turned into a desert. At Arras, even the cruel mercy of a speedy death was denied to the prisoners. all down the Loire, from Samur to the sea, great flocks of crows and kites feasted on naked corpses, twined together in hideous embraces. No mercy was shown to sex or age. The number of young lads and of girls of 17 who were murdered by that execrable government is to be reckoned by hundreds. Babies torn from the breast were tossed from pike to pike along the Jacobin ranks. In the short space of 10 years, millions of human beings perished. Now, there were 70,000 Christians that were slaughtered, beginning especially with the Bartholomew Massacre. There were some before that. But what a payday. 70,000 and millions? A very sad outcome. That God, if they had believed the Bible, if they had read the text that I just read to you, that if you kill by the sword, you will be killed by the sword. If they had only read that and had followed that, they could have been spared this horrible experience. But really, who was responsible for this horrible part of the history of France? It was basically a 3.5-year period. A writer, speaking of the horrors of the revolution, says, "Those excesses are in truth to be charged upon the throne and the church." But we could say that the church has a greater responsibility because the church twisted the arm of the king. Popery had poisoned the minds of kings against the Reformation. And so that's the two people responsible for this horrible condition of things. Here's an example. A papal nuncio warned the king, "Sire, be not deceived. The Protestants will upset all civil as well as religious order. The throne is in as much danger as the altar. The introduction of a new religion must necessarily introduce a new government." And you know what? They were telling the truth. That is the absolute truth. A king or a despot, whatever name you give, is going to be in trouble if people believe the Bible. If they follow the Bible, they will not allow themselves to be governed that way. And that's the reason this whole country was established, to get away from that kind of government and to set up religious freedom and a government that was elected by the people. And if the people are mistreated by the government enough, they pick another government. That's the way it was set up. Why? Because this country was based upon the Bible philosophy. So what they told the king was true. But also, if people really believed the Bible, that church would not be able to exist. And so they saw that if these people are allowed to teach the Bible, it's going to destroy us. And it's going to destroy these dictators. Now let's take this lesson to the end of time. The book Christian Service, page 56, says infidelity prevails in many of the churches in our land. Not infidelity in its broadest sense. And the broad sense is and open denial of the Bible. That's what France did. Open denial of the Bible. The Bible's a problem. We got to get rid of the Bible. We're going to heap every kind of disrespect on the Bible we can. But Satan has gotten smarter now. And so he brings about infidelity in a different way. And here's how he brings it. Not infidelity in its broadest sense, an open denial of the Bible, but an infidelity that is robed in the garb of Christianity, while it is undermining faith in the Bible as a revelation from God. So the Bible is still used in churches today, but what they tell you about some of the Bible lets you know that it's not all inspired and that we can't just follow it exactly as it reads. And so what that is causing is an infidelity. I mean, if some of it can't be believed, how do you know what part you can believe and what part you shouldn't believe? But you know what? In our church, that is spilling over to the spirit of prophecy. And the same difficulty is taking place in regard to the spirit of prophecy. And the end result of that is going to be the Bible, because that's the objective of the devil, to get the Bible. And he's going to win enough to where St. Bartholomew's massacre or something of that nature is going to be able to happen again, but the result is going to be the same to those who do that as happened to France. Church members love what the world loves and are ready to join with them. And Satan determines to unite them in one body and thus strengthen his cause by sweeping all into the ranks of spiritualism. So the first step is to become fascinated with what this world has to offer. And once people get fascinated with that, Satan is able to lead them into spiritualism. They will see in this union a grand movement for the conversion of the world and the ushering in of the long-expected millennium. So Satan is going to make it look like the whole world got converted. I looked for a quote I've read, but I couldn't seem to find it. I must have remembered the wrong words. But in Great Controversies, there is a statement that Satan himself appears to be converted after a sort. It's not a genuine conversion, obviously. But this is what we're looking at. It will be the worst form of infidelity because it is so deceptive. It is so easily able to trip people up and make them fall for it. And yet it will lead to the same thing for those that won't cooperate with the majority. Guess I didn't put the text down here. It's in Revelation 18. I forget the exact verse. And a mighty angel took up a stone like a great millstone and cast it into the sea, saying, "Thus with violence shall that great city Babylon be thrown down, and shall be found no more at all. And in her," why does this happen to Babylon? "And in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth." And so here we see how it all turns out. There's a period of time when God seems to be absent. He doesn't seem to be helping his people that are standing up for the seventh-day Sabbath. And he allows them to have many of the things that happened in France. And the difference is there's no place to hide. You know, what country are you going to flee to? Thousands of people fled France. They went to Germany. They went to other places. But where can you go when the whole world gets involved in this? Now, we are told that some areas won't be as bad as others, but nonetheless, it is worldwide. And so then finally, the close of probation comes, and that stops. No one else is able to be killed. And then we see the 7 last plagues fall. And we see that there is war. People are worried about the Third World War. I don't think it'll happen until that time. But when that time comes, we will have the Third World War that'll make the others look like nothing by comparison to this. And then, you know, all it does is stir them up to be more angry at the Sabbath keepers, and they feel that if they could just get rid of every single Sabbath keeper, they would get rid of this problem. But before they're able to do that, God speaks from heaven. He says, it is done. He says, you're finished. You've gone as far as you're going to go. And payday arrives. This time, it's quite interesting. And, you know, we'd have to have another study to go into it. But they kill each other again, just like in France. Many are destroyed by the plagues, it's true. But in the end, when the tide is turned, they end up killing each other and destroying each other. Because when you do not follow the Bible, when you do not, you're not willing. You want to follow some of it, but you don't want to follow it all. When we're not willing to follow the Bible, we become infidels to some degree. And that's what's going to happen and is happening today. I don't know of any, well-known Protestant school that doesn't teach infidelity. I don't know of a single one. And many Adventists are getting damaged by going to those universities and listening to those instructors. And so the infidelity is growing by leaps and bounds. And I don't think the scenes that we expect to take place are too far in the future. And so what do you think we need to be doing? We need to be getting ready. Now, some people think the most important thing is physical preparation. I do think there's a wisdom in getting some physical preparation. But the most important is the spiritual. There's no time for sleeping. No time for thinking things are just going to keep on going. That's not going to be true. How much longer things can go as we know it, I don't know. But it's not going to go a long time, and we're going to enter in to these scenes that is a repetition. You know, God gave three rounds of this. 2 already and 1 to come. In the city of Jerusalem, when Jerusalem was destroyed, we saw what happens when you get rid of every true Christian in a city. Then in France, we see what happens when you get rid of every true Christian in a whole country. And next time, we're going to see what happens when you try at least to get rid of every Christian on planet Earth. And so some of us are going to live through that. I leave it up to the Lord whether I'm one or not. But if I do, I pray that I'll be faithful through that time and that you will also. May God help us tonight as we think about this solemn message. There might be some changes that you need to make in your lifestyle in order to face what's ahead. Now, don't worry about whether you have enough faith to go through it, but some changes to be able to have a hope to go through what's ahead. And if that is something that will change you in a way for the better, then what a blessing this would have been for you tonight.